We're delighted to be joined on what I hope is a working video link by the Director General of Ordnance Survey, Vanessa. Vanessa, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Would you like to tell us what's been happening at the Cambridge conference?
Most certainly. Well, first of all, I'm very sorry that I'm not with you today. But as you mentioned, the Cambridge conference started last weekend with actually a very English garden party. And it has been very much a full-on agenda, very much on the theme of mapping for a fairer and safer world. And for those that perhaps are less familiar with the Cambridge conference, it was started in 1928. And it was started to bring together, by invitation only, the heads of national mapping agencies from around the world. You might be a little surprised that it's been held in Southampton in 2011. This is a departure for the Cambridge conference, but we had a firm booking with our normal college, St John's College, Cambridge, but it turned out to be their 500th birthday this actual summer. And so we came to an arrangement with them that actually they rather preferred to use the whole of their facilities for many celebrations, including last week and this week several royal visits. So I'm delighted that none of our delegates were kind of challenged by the Cambridge conference in Hampshire. And by Sunday afternoon, we had about 120 heads of national mapping agencies and ministers representing over 70 countries. One of your distinguished members of the panel today, Professor Nigel Shadbolt, has played very much a main part because he was the opening keynote speaker on the first morning. And we've covered many, many topics from open data to leadership to looking at the role of the United Nations within our industry, and also making sure that all our delegates thought of things slightly differently. And for that, we had Dr. Maggie Adrian-Pocock join us to look at the mapping of the universe, because there's always a wonderful lecture named after Martin Hoteen, who was the first Director General of the Director of Overseas Surveys. And the premise behind that particular lecture, which is held on one of the evenings, is very much to look completely differently at a subject but relate it to the subject. And I have to say, Maggie did an outstanding job of both entertaining and assisting our delegates to think of their own subject in a different way. We were joined by Air Marshal Sir Stuart Peach. Stuart is the head of all deployable forces for that Britain has overseas, and gave us great insights into what's exactly happening in certain places, but also the many, many leadership lessons that he was able to bring. And then our connection to Cambridge was established for us by Lord Richard Wilson. Many of you may remember he was the Cabinet Secretary, the head of the British Civil Service for a long time, but many of our delegates soon understood when he explained exactly who he was, in the fact that anyone who's seen the television program Yes Minister or Yes Prime Minister will remember Sir Humphrey. And in fact, the whole television program was not only filmed in his office, but also was modelled on him as Sir Humphrey. He was Britain's Sir Humphrey at the time of that television program being made. But he gave us a fantastic insight into leading very complex organizations in complex times, in ever-changing times. We've done a lot of discussion about the role of national mapping agencies, the role of the private sector, and the way we should all be working together. Nigel came along and challenged us on several occasions, both as the opening keynote and also he chaired an outstanding session looking at open data, both taking examples from other parts of the world and speeches from other parts of the world, but also it was titled, Open Data, Is It an Opportunity or a Threat? And I'm sure that Nigel will today be telling you that over 75% of the audience voted at the end to say it was an opportunity, not a threat. But we had delegates from, the head of Mongolia was here, the head of Nepal was here, the head of the Philippines, and obviously all the Caribbean countries from British Virgin Islands, Cayman Islands, and of course we all live within different government views. Our colleagues from Malaysia very much were talking about their different structures, and what was interesting was how much synergy there is between the different issues that the Director Generals are having to deal with. We talked a lot about data sharing and also about the role of geospatial data within the whole data agendas of government, and how geospatial data is but one element of government data, but very much is seen as an underpinning infrastructure. Our delegates were fascinated by INSPIRE. Of course, within our delegations, there were the Director Generals of the European National Mapping Agencies, but very, very clearly what we saw was that people were very involved with trying to understand how INSPIRE worked. And it was very encouraging yesterday on a panel to see His Excellency, who heads the General Commission of Survey in Saudi Arabia, very much openly comment with his colleagues from the United Arab Emirates that perhaps the Arab League should start to think about what they could do to have their own INSPIRE. They told us to the conference that on many occasions there had been discussions of how to work better together within the national and cadastral agencies of the Middle East, but they were very, very attracted to the way Europe has worked together. Contingency planning was a key element because we were lucky enough to have the head of the Japanese National Mapping Agency and the person who led also on the emergency here. Plus, we also had Colin MacDonald, who's my opposite number for New Zealand, and both were able to talk about disaster management and how they had reacted to the devastating earthquakes that have gone on in their own countries. And I would say we were all very moved by both of those presentations and the extraordinary resilience our mapping colleagues had shown in order to get the outcomes they needed for their countries at such a desperate time for them. But also the plans they're putting in place to make sure that everything in their countries are remapped to today's geography as quickly as is possible. We had a whole session on INSPIRE, and very clearly what we saw was that people quickly found that they were feeling that there was more to INSPIRE than just what Europe had done. Besides what I've just mentioned from our colleagues in Saudi Arabia, there were people throughout the whole of Asia talking about what they could do. What everyone realized from the 5 presentations from the 5 Director Generals who presented on INSPIRE, and the whole topic of that session was INSPIRE, what has it done for your country? was that people realised that Inspire had raised the political profile of location in their country and stimulated activity at all levels across multi-agencies. It had provided that vehicle for greater communication between people, and people realising that at the highest level of their governments, the importance of locality data. People realised that, that sometimes it's quite difficult, even at the most senior level of the national mapping agencies, to engage the politicians with their agenda. And it was very much emphasised in the Inspire session to the rest of the world that certainly Inspire had raised the benchmark of understanding of government ministers in Europe about the issues and importance of accurate, definitive geospatial data, and very clearly the importance of knowing what data one has. And it's very much promoted and prompted the creation of national strategies, and very much there was a view that it's worked very well with all the e-government strategies that are now in place across Europe. What was clear, though, was that it hasn't been easy for people to do Inspire. And many of our colleagues from around the world were fascinated to hear about some of the threats that people had thought about when Inspire was first talked about. Because one of the nervousnesses that Nigel Shadbold will be able to talk more as he's with you is very much that there were significant thoughts in certain countries about the massive problems of budget constraints, the massive problems of lack of skills. And what was interesting, as I'll mention in a moment, but capacity building was not just an issue for the countries that traditionally people have related to capacity building, such as Africa and the Caribbean. It was absolutely the issue for many, many countries. I spoke to a country where 60% of their population is under the age of 14, and their issues of capacity and training are massive versus budget. What was also was very much people were encouraged to hear that actually Inspire had made people want to use more data rather than mandatorily say you had to use more data. And also many of us talked about it wasn't just the legislative process that binds us together, it was now actually people seeing the need for doing this. And I know that countries from all over the world were very impressed at the whole Inspire initiative. What was also talked about within the same session by the heads of national mapping from across Europe was the digital agenda for Europe, and how Eurogeographics, which is the group that brings together 44 heads of national mapping agencies in Europe, how Eurogeographics has engaged with the digital agenda. And if you haven't read it, they have produced a paper on the digital agenda for Europe, very much looking at interoperability and basically looking at the use of data within trust and security. What was interesting was people were very interested in discussing the ever-changing technology and how national mapping agencies are managing to invest quick enough in order to keep ahead in this very fast-moving agenda. A lot of discussion, as Nigel will be able to talk further on, about the freemium model. Very much the term used for some data being free and some data being premium, and often the premium data actually funding the free data. And so there was a huge discussion about that, loads of interest. I personally have been lucky enough to be working in a couple of other countries recently, advising their governments, most particularly the Australians, and the Australians are were fascinated at how we could do this within a national mapping context. but it was very much the sharing of data and the using of data was very central to all of these themes. Nigel, I'm going to embarrass you, and I do assume, I haven't been told, but I'm rather assuming you got back from your rather amazing hectic schedule this week, because I know that since you left us on Wednesday, you were going into Europe, hopefully not subject to the strikes, and back again. But here's a quote from you, and I thought it was very apt for both our conference and also the Inspire conference. At the Cambridge conference, there were always resolutions. And I'm sure Nigel will be delighted to know there is a resolution being put together on open data. Basically, there was strong support about working within different, obviously, government structures and different government legal and fiscal structures, but with very much a support from the conference for open data. That particular resolution is being drafted by 6 countries, and as at this morning, I do not have it. But then the drafting was going on, I don't actually believe late into the night, because I know exactly what everyone was doing last night. All the nations were singing together, and I'll talk about that a bit more in a moment. But what I know is until they went away to sing last night, all the Director Generals were working hard on their resolutions. So I already have received 3 resolutions, and basically the theme of Cambridge Conference has always been that there are resolutions to take back to nations, to take back to people's politicians, to very much express the thoughts of the collective group of Director Generals. And basically these are the 3 resolutions that so far have been written up. That the conference expresses its strong and unanimous support for the United Nations Initiative on Global Geospatial Information Management and urges the United Nations to move this initiative forward as a priority action as soon as possible. Many of you may know that this is being currently debated in New York, and there is very, very strong support from certain regions of the world, and other regions are still thinking about it. And certainly all of us will be contacting our own ambassadors at the UN within the next 24 to 48 hours to ensure that they clearly understand where this conference stood on this Global Geospatial Information Management group. Very much what this is going to be a group that's going to actually report in to a very senior part of the United Nations, and for many countries it will drive even better quality geospatial data being produced in their countries, particularly in some of our developing or near developing world countries. Basically, I can see that a gremlin has got into my next call is a challenge in our industry. We're not training enough people. There's a high demand for people who are trained, and we've got a burgeoning industry. A nice problem to have, but it's vital that we continue to address it and work with our, encourage to work with our universities and our politicians to get the adequate funding for those courses. And then location-based information is a key, just isn't a plane that could get me to you. Because last night we followed our tradition. In 1928, the Director Generals came with a poem from their countries. When I became Director General, I basically suggested that music tended to bring everyone together. And for some delegates, they're here on their own. I have colleagues from Malawi, I have colleagues from Sierra Leone, I have colleagues from the Congo, and from, well, so many nations who are the single representative of their country. Throughout the week, they've become friends with people from all over the world. They've made those connections, and those connections will keep. For many, they found support from other countries. And on the last evening, during the week, we always have a very busy program. They leave their hotels at 8:15, and surprisingly, nobody ever missed the bus. They get back to their hotels normally just before midnight, because every night we do something together, including taking them to a planetarium where Dr. Maggie Adrian-Pocock spoke, but also we had an evening of cricket. And I can assure you, we had Ordnance survey, for which I'm the president of the cricket club, versus the rest of the world. The rest of the world definitely won, but they did have something like 75 players against our 11. Anyway, everybody batted and everybody had a chance in this. And last night we took them to Bewley to basically have an evening together, and nations are asked, not too much in advance, if they would like to sing or do something. I will tell you, it was extremely moving to see our Japanese colleagues decide to, there's a song that's uniting their country in disaster, and they decided to sing this song. We saw our colleagues from Saudi Arabia decide to sing a very romantic song of how people should come together. And then we saw a whole group from, I think it was 11 nations, where they were single people come together, single delegates, and they had written a song about how cadastral data and mapping data was fundamental to changing the world. And with that, I'd like to thank you.
Vanessa Lawrence, ladies and gentlemen.